Today I want to talk about two ethical theories, consequentialism and deontology, and how I think they can be reconciled within a Christian framework. So consequentialism is the ethical idea captured by the phrase, the ends justify the means. It's an outcomes-oriented ethical rule. So there are no absolute rules in consequentialism, only the outcomes determine morality. We're interested in good outcomes. So it gives a clear metric for action, but it seems to yield unintuitive results. For example, if you're a doctor and you have 5 patients that you could potentially save by killing one patient and harvesting their organs to save the other 5, a consequentialist might say that you should do that. You should kill the one patient to save the 5 because the consequences are good. The other ethical theory is deontology. Deontology is a rules-based ethical system. So there are certain rules and duties that you are to follow absolutely at all times. This can make more sense intuitively. There are certain rules like don't murder, don't steal that seem like absolute rules that shouldn't be crossed. But it can be difficult when rules conflict or when rules yield terrible consequences. Also, the rules themselves can seem arbitrary. We have to ask where do rules come from and why. An example might be, imagine you're living in World War II Germany and the Nazis knock on your door and ask, are you hiding Jews? And let's say you are hiding Jews. Do you tell them the truth? Intuitively, it seems like you're justified in lying because it would protect lives and the Nazis don't have the right to ask anyway. But a strict deontologist might say it's never okay to lie. And so you should just either tell the truth or remain silent, which would arouse suspicion. So I think these two views can ultimately be reconciled within Christianity. My intuition has been that on the surface, deontology might seem like it fits more with Christianity. Christianity has, the Mosaic Law, commandments from Christ, and so on. It seems very rules-based. But it's always troubled me. It seems that rules ultimately need to be connected to consequences, to outcomes somehow, or else they're arbitrary. You don't want to just follow rules for the sake of following rules. You want the rules to ultimately lead to something good. And I've always had the intuition that from a Christian framework, the rules are not arbitrary. They're ultimately connected to some good outcome, even if that good outcome is not seen in this life. So let me present a framework that I'm calling Christian consequentialism. So this is simply consequentialism, but from a Christian framework that I think transforms it in unique ways. First of all, in normal consequentialist frameworks, you can never have deontological rules. You can never have hard and fast rules. A traditional consequentialist can never say, for instance, a murder is always wrong. Because a finite being can't know that in every circumstance, the consequences of murder are always going to be bad. There might be some circumstance where the consequences of murder are actually good, right? You simply cannot know that. But an all-knowing God can know that. An all-knowing God can make assertions like murder is always wrong, rape is always wrong, etc. Because an all-knowing God can conceive of every conceivable circumstance and can look at all the possible outcomes. So, first of all, we now have a consequentialist system that can still support deontological rules. I would also say that in Christian consequentialism, we have to consider, in addition, if not primarily, the consequences to eternal souls. We're not just dealing with earthly consequences, but eternal consequences. So every action, from the white lie to the murder to the small act of kindness, has an impact on eternal souls. So now you might ask, how do we know about eternal consequences? How do we understand what the impact is to eternal souls? Here I would say that earthly consequences reflect or give us some indication of what the consequences are in the spiritual realm, but they do so imperfectly because the world has fallen. We know generally that murder yields bad consequences, although we can't know that it yields bad consequences in every circumstance. But we simply trust that is indicating a general spiritual rule that yes, murder is always wrong, murder always yields bad consequences, even when it doesn't seem so. Ultimately, the light of conscience is our guide as to spiritual consequences. It indicates that some actions are worse than others and that there are actions that are wrong despite the apparent consequences. This resolves the classic Euthyphro dilemma. So in the Euthyphro dilemma, the question is, are things good simply because God commands them, or does God command them because they're good? We don't want the good to be based on arbitrary divine commands, But we also don't want the good to be some standard outside or above God. So here the classical solution is just that the good is identical to God's character. God is the good. And so God as the creator structures reality and consequence in such a way that necessarily coheres with God's nature. So consequences are always going to ultimately flow out of the good, that is God. Here's how this plays out practically. So practically this view ends up looking a lot like virtue ethics or Thomas Aquinas' natural law. But we ground that ethical view in consequences. In virtue ethics, the concern is not just on actions. The question is not how should I act, but what kind of person should I be? And how should I act to become that person, right? And that coheres well with the question of what are the consequences on my eternal soul? There's really the same question. We cultivate virtues that conform us to God's character. We follow divinely revealed principles that reflect God's perfect consequentialist reasoning that we can't always access. We develop conscience and practical wisdom in conformity to divine revelation to discern right action in particular situations. And we have faith that acting according to God's nature will produce the best outcomes eternally, even if we can't see them. So I feel that this is really important. Really, this is just an addition to or an underpinning of Aquinas' natural law or Aristotle's virtue ethics. But the underpinning is really important. We don't want to divorce rules from consequences. We don't want to say, hey, just follow the rules arbitrarily, whether they're good or bad, just do the right thing just cause. Right? We want to have faith that ultimately doing the right thing will have the best ultimate outcome. And as Christians, we can't have that. We can't have confidence in that, right? Because God is the one who structures reality. God structures reality in such a way that it guarantees that that will be the case. Doing the right thing will always ultimately produce the best outcome, even if it doesn't seem that way in this present life. We trust that there's an eternal realm and that our actions ripple out into that realm in our own souls and the souls of others, and that the effects that we produce are ultimately good, even when it doesn't seem like it, when we follow God's commands. There are my thoughts. That's my ethical framework. Let me know if you have any comments, reactions. Let me know what you think.